What are some other teaching practices that leverage what we know about the role prior knowledge plays in learning? Earlier, I described a method I use in my statistics course, a method known as peer instruction. This method does a great job of helping students activate prior knowledge. Here's how it works. I ask my students a multiple choice question. In statistics, mine are often concept questions, but other kinds of questions can work well too. Students take a minute or two to think about and respond to the question using a classroom response system of some kind. I take a look at the results, and based on those results, do one of three things. If most of the students, say 85 or 90%, have answered the question correctly, I know that we don't have to spend too much more time on the question. For most students, their prior knowledge was sufficient to answer correctly. We'll discuss the question briefly, since some of the students might have been guessing, but move on fairly soon. If most of the students, again say 85 or 90%, answer incorrectly, then I know their prior knowledge isn't up to the task. We need to backtrack. I might explain something again, or show them why the most common wrong answer is indeed wrong, or have them tackle an easier question as a first step. Ideally, when I ask a question like this, the students are split among 2 or 3 answer choices. This indicates to me that the question is the right difficulty level, not too hard, not too easy. There's some useful prior knowledge in the room, so I have my students pair up and discuss the question. I ask them to explain their reasoning to each other, and I'll often say things like, if you and your partner already agree on the answer, talk about it anyway, because you might both be wrong. After a second round of voting, we then discuss the question as a whole class. I'll ask students to argue for and against various answer choices, and try to guide the class to the correct answer and the correct reasoning using the students' own comments and perspectives. By the time we get to the class-wide discussion phase, the students have had 2 important opportunities to activate their prior knowledge. First, when they thought about the question individually, and second, when they discussed the question in pairs. Typically, this means that a lot of students have something to say during the class-wide discussion, and they're more prepared to follow and understand that discussion as well because they've activated that prior knowledge. The term peer instruction was coined by Harvard physics professor Eric Mazur. He's also helped popularize this approach to classroom engagement and has done some significant research showing its effectiveness. It's now a common instructional practice across the STEM disciplines. Peer instruction is useful in many teaching contexts, but there are other practices that leverage what we know about prior knowledge. For surfacing students' prior knowledge, making it more visible to you and to them, you might give them an interesting problem and ask them to brainstorm solutions and identify what they know or what they think they know and what they don't. You might have them write what are sometimes called minute papers. Ask students to take out a sheet of paper, maybe at the end of one class, and write down something they know about the topic coming up in the next class session. Read through those minute papers between classes, then you'll have some idea of what to expect from students the next day. Doodling can also work to surface students' prior knowledge. Have them draw a picture or a diagram to represent how they understand some topic or problem, maybe how blood flows from the heart to the body. Then pass those doodles to the front of the room. You can look through doodles pretty quickly and get a sense of what they're thinking. We've shared a couple of ideas for activating students' prior knowledge already. Another simple strategy is to be explicit about drawing on earlier material in your course. Let students know at the beginning of class which past topics will be relevant to the day's discussion. Analogies can help too, relating new ideas to concepts that students already know well. Although, as Michaela indicated, you want to make sure your students don't have the wrong analogy in their heads. And for some topics, you can ask students to draw on their personal everyday experience as a way to connect with more abstract course material. One last point. Take a second and see if you recognize what's happening in this picture. This fellow is dropping Mentos breath mints into a 2-liter of Diet Coke. What follows is a fairly dramatic geyser of Diet Coke. You may have seen videos of this phenomenon before, or even tried it yourself. A few years ago, my daughter's preschool had a science day where parents were invited to come to school and do sciencey things. I was the dad who brought in the exploding Coke. Even with 5-year-olds, once I had done the demonstration, they wanted to know why it worked. Now imagine doing this with a first-year college physics class. You could really get into the reasons why the carbonation of Diet Coke produces this effect. Now consider 2 ways to use this demonstration in a college class. You could spend 15 minutes explaining the physics of Mentos and Diet Coke, and then do the demonstration. Or you could start with the demonstration, ask students to conjecture why it works, then provide them that 15-minute explanation. Which approach is likely to engage the students more? In which approach are students likely to better understand that explanation? Starting with the demonstration, then providing the explanation after, is an example of what Shorts and Bransford call creating a time for telling. You've prepared students to want to hear your explanation and to make sense of it. You're not likely to help your students develop more robust mental models of how the world works simply by telling them things or explaining things to them. That is, by just lecturing during class. But I'm not saying that you should never lecture to your students or provide some type of explanation. A lecture can provide students with a very helpful explanation of something they don't fully understand, provided they're ready to make sense of that explanation. Once you've activated students' prior knowledge, perhaps even showing them where their existing mental models fail to explain phenomenon, it can be perfectly fine to give a short lecture as part of a time for telling.